Hello, Discourse on Metaphysics 10 today. That the belief in substantial forms has some basis, but that these forms do not change anything in the phenomena and must not be used to explain particular effects. Now, this is really interesting. Okay, Leibniz is an early modern philosopher. Most significant philosophers after Descartes in this period don't take substantial forms very seriously. Substantial forms is a relic of Aristotelian philosophy that was really a central part of Christian thought from the time of Thomas Aquinas to like this day when Leibniz is writing. So the philosophers have largely moved on past substantial forms, but Leibniz is here saying something about them. It's not altogether negative, that the belief in substantial forms has some basis, is what he says. But that these forms do not change anything in the phenomena and must not be used to explain particular effects. Okay. It seems that the ancients, as well as many able men accustomed to deep meditation, who have taught theology and philosophy some centuries ago, some of whom are respected for their saintliness, have had some knowledge of what we have just said. Do you remember what we just said in section 9? This is the marks and traces. In the substance is the whole universe. There's marks of what has been, traces of what will be, and vestiges of what has been, marks of what will be, and traces of everything that happens in the whole universe. So all of that is contained somehow in the perceptions of the substance, of each substance, from a particular point of view. That point of view of the substance ends up being what really distinguishes one substance from another. Okay. It seems that the ancients, as well as many able men accustomed to deep meditation who have taught theology and philosophy some centuries ago, some of whom are respected for their saintliness, have had some knowledge of what we have just said. This is why they introduced and maintained the substantial forms which are so decried today. But they are not so distant from the truth, nor so ridiculous as the common lot of our new philosophers imagines. I agree that the consideration of these forms serves no purpose in the details of physics, and must not be used to explain particular phenomena. That is where the scholastics failed, as did the physicians of the past who followed their example, believing that they could account for the properties of bodies by talking about forms and qualities without taking the trouble to examine their manner of operation. It's not the form of what the thing is, but the mechanism of what it does that makes the difference, that does the explaining. It is as if we were content to say that a clock has a quality of clockness derived from its form without considering in what all of this consists. That would be sufficient for the person who buys the clock, provided that he turns over its care to another. Ooh, this is connecting a dot that I've been missing for a while. Emily du Châtelet, says something about explaining their clocks because they're clocks. I think this is similar language being used to a different point. Very interested. Anyway, moving on. But this misunderstanding and misuse of forms must not cause us to reject something whose knowledge is so necessary in metaphysics that, I hold, without it one cannot properly know the first principles or elevate our minds sufficiently well to the knowledge of incorporeal natures and the wonders of God. However, just as a geometer does not need to burden his mind with the famous labyrinth of the composition of the continuum, we could spend a lot of time talking about that, there is no need for any moral philosopher, and even less need for a jurist or statesman, to trouble himself with the great difficulties involved in reconciling free will and God's providence, since the geometer can achieve all his demonstrations and the statesman can complete all his deliberations without entering into these discussions that remain necessary and important in philosophy and theology. In the same way, a physicist can explain some experiments, at times using previous simpler experiments, and at times using geometric and mechanical demonstrations without needing general considerations from another sphere. And if he uses God's concourse, or else a soul, an animating force, or something else of this nature, he is raving just as much as the person who, in the course of an important practical deliberation, enters into a lofty discussion concerning the nature of destiny and the nature of our freedom. In fact, people often commit this fault without thinking when they encumber their minds with the consideration of fatalism, and sometimes are even diverted from a good resolution or a necessary duty in this way. This is a good passage. Man, I'd love to have a discussion about this one. There's lots of stuff happening here. We've got concepts that are useful in some discussions and not useful in other discussions. When is it the appropriate time to roll out this concept, to use this concept? Where do we start? There seems to be a starting with the practical, starting with aims, starting with ends. We could get down to like really understanding what everything is made of, but you are a person who needs to make a decision, or you are a person who is pursuing some end, right? There's limits. It's okay to limit, but where do we put those limits? Very interesting. And then conceptually, right, using concepts from old philosophies and using them in a way, in their proper context, putting them in their right discussion, using them in a way that brings clarity instead of confusion. I'm really interested in that. Leibniz has taught me a lot about that. All right, we'll keep going.